Hi, everyone. This is Talk Back. We only have 4 weeks until the election. This is an exciting time and a very important time. And we're having guests who are running for office and who are trying to make a difference in the lives of Eastern Connecticut and the nation. So I'm happy to have with us our Congressman Joe Courtney, who is here to tell us about his campaign and the issues. Hi, Joe. It's good to have you.
Thank you, Sheila, and really appreciate the chance to catch up. You're right. This is a really important election, a lot at stake.
Okay. And there were so many issues, and I know you've been in the forefront of so many things that are happening in Eastern Connecticut and in the country. And we're going to start, I think, with the economy, because that's on everybody's minds. So talk a bit about how the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed in Congress with no Republican votes, although they're taking credit for some of it, right? How that is going to help and how it's going to make a difference in Eastern Connecticut.
Sure. So you're absolutely right. I mean, you obviously know this part of Connecticut, and so do I. And you know, it's a very down-to-earth, meat and potatoes district, and the economy is always uppermost on people's minds. There's a lot of forces that are going on out there right now that have created some anxiety. The global markets that were disrupted by COVID, and then now we have Putin's war, which clearly disrupted the oil and gas markets. Prices spiked up really overnight after the invasion in February of this year, and people are really still struggling with that. I think the Inflation Reduction Act, which I'll talk about in a second, I think really had made some good headway in terms of addressing it. But to me, and Chris Dodd used to always say this, which is that the most important social program is a good job. And to me, that's always been my North Star in terms of how I've approached my time in office. Right now, the job market in Eastern Connecticut is very strong. The last labor report that came out from Connecticut, the Norwich, New London market actually had the highest growth last year in terms of new jobs. I've been very involved with a big part of that, with obviously the Navy and the Navy's budget, which comes through my subcommittee. I chair Sea Power still. And every day is my morning box score, now that the Red Sox are out of the contention, is how many job openings are at Electric Boat. This morning, the number is 533. Wow. And again, this is on top of all of the new jobs that have been added over the last 5 or 6 years. And to me, in terms of how do you take advantage of that growth, is that you've got to really look at what's holding some people back from taking these opportunities, and a big piece of it is the skills gap. And again, in Norwich, we've been very strong in terms of setting up a manufacturing pipeline, which is an accelerated way to get people within the space of 8 to 10 weeks ready to be hired, not just by Electric Boat, but also some of the other smaller companies. And I visited one in Basra just a couple days ago where they had graduates of the program that's there. Governor Lamont just devoted $70 million to increase the number of slots in that program. It's a free program. They actually give some support for people in terms of daycare and transportation, if you need it during that training period there. And to me, that is just exactly the kind of approach which we know is working, but we've got to really keep the help, and the federal government now is funding roughly about 2/3 of that program. So, to me, that's, the work of my office that kind of gets me out of bed in the morning, because you're seeing real results.
Isn't that one of the issues, that we have a great education system in Connecticut in general compared
right.
to the rest of the country, but there's always that issue, the gap between the education and the jobs that are available. We have great high schools, but how do you connect after high school to the sophisticated,
right.
more difficult
jobs? And it's a great question, because Secretary Cardona, President Biden's Secretary of Energy, was up to visit the district a while back, and we went down to Grasso Tech, which again is completely maxed out. They've got a waiting list of kids because the skills they're teaching there is like instant jobs that go with it. What the pipeline is doing now is they are actually expanding that program into comprehensive high schools like Norwich Free Academy, Bacon Academy. I was with a young woman the other day at that employer I talked about, who went to RAM High School, which is up in Hebron there. And she took a metal trades course through this program, and I mean, she literally just graduated from high school, and she's got a great job that's there. So yes, I mean, you're right. We've got to make sure that this option is accessible to young people. Again, I'm not critical of people who want to go to the traditional 2-year, 4-year higher education, but the fact is that and those sometimes can lead to getting hired with all these new jobs.
We need to figure out the pipeline. Who's
Correct.
going to go into the academic?
And a lot of kids are now finding their own way to it because the
Yeah.
word is getting out that
Right.
these are not just sort of a paycheck; these are careers that people
Right.
have there. So, in terms of how to address again the cost of living, which is what you started out with here, the Inflation Reduction Act did a number of things that I think are significant. Number one, it cut the deficit, which that is good in terms of reducing federal borrowing that is, can drive up interest rates unnecessarily. Number two, it cut the cost of prescription drugs for seniors. Again, for 20 years, we've been trying to get the federal government to negotiate lower prices. Edith Prague.
What has been in the way of that? Just
The pharmaceutical
big pharma?
industry, yes,
Big- yeah,
totally. This
big
was
pharma.
completely.
And you did not get one Republican vote, and now, as you were saying before, they're trying to undo that. And they're
Absolutely.
announcing it now that
Brazenly.
that's one of the policies they'll put into effect if they win back to Congress.
Totally.
And does your
Kevin
opponent agree with that?
Well, again, the commitment to America, that's what Kevin McCarthy's platform is. And again, it talks about replacing the democratic socialist drug takeover with, more competition, more transparency, which is what we've been listening to for 20 years. Medicare is overpaying for simple medications like insulin who have been off patent for 100 years.
But even that, you couldn't quite get through insulin for
Working age.
Right.
Correct, which is unfortunate, but we're not. That fight's
But
not
you got
done
it through for Medicare.
So it's $35 a month cap, which is about a third of what Medicare patients are paying now. In subsequent years, that we're going to extend the savings to other medications, and there'll be an overall cap of out-of-pocket by 2025 of $2,000. Right. And again, for groups that suffer from chronic illness, that is just a life-changing reform that's there. But as you point out, McCarthy is already hell-bent in terms of trying to just reverse that, and the ink is barely dry. The other piece in terms of energy is that it's kind of an all of the above approach. There's a historic amount of investment in green energy and clean energy. Some of that involves giving people tax credits to upgrade their homes with electric heat pumps to sort of move away from fossil fuel home heating systems. Just a whole variety of things. The calculation by most environmental groups is that it will reduce carbon emissions by 40% by 2030, which is a very, impressive, accelerated move that's going to take place there. It also included more mandates for the administration to open up more drilling in the Gulf of Mexico and up in Alaska to try and increase supply.
Right. So even though the ultimate goal is to get away
Right.
from fossil fuels eventually, we still have the recognition that with OPEC and with what's happening in Russia, we have to do something in the interim.
You're
And
absolutely right.
Biden is trying to do that, and the people
And
have
in fact, the first notifications came out
Yeah.
from the Department of Interior for those drilling just last week. I
Right.
mean, this is not sort of a hypothetical multi-year. It's happening in real time. That's happening. But, we've got more work to do. By the way, for Medicare, we had a great announcement that the Part B premium, which gets always deducted from people's Social Security check, is going down in 2023. That's the first time in 11 years that's happened. A bunch of us were hounding the Secretary of HHS, Javier Becerra, that they overcharged in last year's premium, and to their credit, they adjusted it downwards. Social Security is about to come out with their COLA for 2023, which is conservatively going to be at least 8%. So
pretty high.
it is.
Yeah.
So the combination of an increased COLA, a lower premium, and more drug price relief, that's a big
Right.
help for people who are struggling with
Of course,
the
in
cost of
addition
living.
to being against this prescription negotiations, with Medicare negotiating for prescription drugs, the Republicans also want to do away with what's the other thing that I was thinking of? Something else in the medical field. They don't want. They don't want. Well, they don't want unemployment is going down. They don't want the minimum wage, right?
And also, I mean, we did extend the subsidies for the Affordable Care Act people, which again, that saved millions of families in terms of premiums and co-payments.
But this past Congress hasn't been able to get through the Minimum Wage Act, but you try to do that when you come back. And we know that in Connecticut, your opponent voted against the minimum wage in Connecticut.
Right, which you know, when you think about it, I mean, it's now, I think it's going up in increments. It's between $13 and $14 an hour, which, you know, for an individual living in the state, I mean, you're starting the day in poverty and you're ending the day in poverty.
Now, there's paid family medical leave, which is another thing that we have in Connecticut, but again, your opponent voted against it. What's the status of that at the national level? We have unpaid family medical leave, but we want paid.
Well, the House, which is, you know, we have a very slender majority, but we were able to pass the Build Back Better, which would have actually finally established a federal paid medical leave, which, you know, honestly, I give Connecticut great credit for stepping up and doing that, as well as the child tax credit, which they created because the 1-year tax credit we had in Washington expired. But frankly, that should be a national policy, and states should not have to bear, you know, that burden, because it does kind of sometimes create some disadvantage economically vis-a-vis other states. Having said all that, you know, we really, I think, have a lot of work still left to do, even with all the progress that we've made. And I said, combined with the job growth and some of the help for people on Social Security, there's about 112,000 people who collect Social Security in the 2nd Congressional District. There's about 700,000 people that live here. So that's a sizable population that's going to get some help.
The other thing I was trying to refer to is the Republicans have in their program, if they take over the Congress, that they would revisit or sunset Social Security every 3 years, 7 years, or something like that. And then some senator, I think it was Johnson from Wisconsin, came out and said he wants to see it sunsetted every year. Has your opponent come out in favor of that?
You know, I haven't heard him explicitly react to it, but, you know, to your point, I mean, Rick Scott is the one who has been pushing it. He's the head of the Republican Senate Campaign Committee. He's not some backbencher. I mean, he's in leadership in the Senate. In the House, what we do know is that if the Republicans take control, the congressman who will be in charge of the Budget Committee, Buddy Carter from Georgia, has already come out and said that he thinks Social Security should be bifurcated. In other words, seniors who are on it should have their benefits left alone, but younger people, working age people, are going to have to pay the price, which is outrageous. That is a complete violation of the promise of Social Security.
So this is interesting. So many people will tell you that I don't vote for the party, I vote for the person. But they don't necessarily, do they appreciate that when they vote for the party, they vote, if they're voting for a Republican, they're voting for perhaps Kevin McCarthy to become the Speaker of the House, and all of these things do away with, well, they're probably going to try to overdo Obamacare again, right? They're going to try to change Social Security, they're going to take away the prescription, I mean, it's on and on. And they're talking about impeaching Biden or investigating his son over and over and over again. Do people realize that voting for your candidate, that you think you like him personally, is going to mean he's going to be part of that caucus to do all the things that maybe you don't want? Did you ever talk about that?
I mean, I would say it's mixed out there in terms of how much people really focus in terms of just the way you know, control will shift from one party to the next in a midterm election. I personally feel that with the Roe v. Wade decision, the awareness has gotten much higher about really the fact that there really is going to be a different approach in terms of trying to address the Dobbs case which overturned Roe with Kevin McCarthy, and you know, who has basically endorsed the Lindsey Graham measure versus what the Democrats did, which is that we passed a measure to codify Roe v. Wade.
Which is so hypocritical, because the Dobbs decision basically said, Alito said in that decision, this is a one-off, and this is to take it to the states. This is to leave it as a state function. And now Lindsey Graham says, well, never mind, it should be a national law.
No, I mean, and as you know, I mean, that was a case that was decided on whether there's an actual constitutional protection, once you removed that, which is what they did by overturning Roe, then it's completely wide open to Congress. And Mike Pence, within, I think, about 48 hours, he came out for a total national ban. Graham's is banned after 15 weeks, which is completely at odds with Connecticut's law, and also completely at odds with the medical
So people
groups.
should understand that many states have passed very drastic abortion restrictions. Nothing in the event of rape or incest or the life of the mother. No exceptions to abortion. But many other states, fewer, like our state, have already, years ago, codified it. But that would mean nothing if the federal government, because the federal law supersedes the state law, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So that's what we have to worry about.
Totally. I mean, I was there in the legislature when we passed the codification and the vote. I mean, it's really kind of interesting to just go back in history, because this was about 1990 when it passed. Bill O'Neill was governor, and the vote was 136-12 in the House to codify Roe v. Wade.
Which means a lot of Republicans voted.
Oh, totally.
For it.
And it was 31-3 in the Senate.
Right.
And Bill O'Neill, as you know, was a very conservative Democrat. And but partly it shows how the issue has changed in terms of just the polarization. But I don't think the center of gravity has changed in Connecticut at all.
No,
since
not in
1990.
Connecticut, and in other states too. But now I read, have you heard this, that your opponent was actually standing on the steps of the Capitol celebrating the overturning of Roe versus Wade?
Right. So when the decision was handed down in June, there was an event held celebrating the overturning. Mike called it a great day, which it was not. And since then, actually was on Channel 3 and was asked point blank, would you vote for the Lindsey Graham 15-week ban? And he did, after some sort of wandering around, did to his credit come out and say, yeah, he would.
He did finally say yes. But
that sharpens the choice here, because again, the American College.
Oh, and he voted against the codification. He's not for it. He voted against another law that would have made it easier for people from out of state to gain services in Connecticut. He voted against that.
And protect the doctors in Connecticut from these vigilante lawsuits, which Texas has created. Again, the medical experts, whether it's the American Medical Association, the American College of OBGYNs, the American Nurses Association, I mean, there's about a dozen of them who came out really vehemently opposed to the court's decision, and have already come out now in terms of the 15-week ban and what that means in terms of taking away the ability of patients and their doctors to make very private decisions.
Now, you are direct. If someone asks you a question, you'll give them a yes or no. But doesn't it aggravate you when you watch politicians squirm out of questions, and you watch interviewers, maybe because they need to know that the person will come back again, they just don't ask the right follow-up questions and never get a straight answer. They're just dancing around. You notice that when you're doing an interview with your opponent or someone else?
I mean, it's it's like a national pastime in Washington in terms of how to deflect questions. And but again, in this instance, I think the reporter was persistent and did get an answer. And as I said, I mean, if anyone has questions about it, certainly they can contact our campaign. The key here, in my opinion, based on where we live, and I think you would agree with this, is Roe v. Wade was built around a constitutional doctrine that said we have a constitutional right to privacy. Right. And that started with...
started in Connecticut with contraception.
Griswold versus Connecticut, and then right to travel, which is, again, that's not in the Constitution. That's not enumerated. But they found that as a personal constitutional right.
They built it out of the 14th Amendment.
Correct. And the right to marry who you love. Obviously, same-sex marriage, the Obergefell decision. So once, Alito knocked down Roe v. Wade on the grounds that there was not an enumerated right in the Constitution, that put all these other cases at risk, because the principle is the same.
Which Justice Thomas, I don't even like calling him, but he is sadly Justice Thomas, in his agreement, his assenting opinion, said these things are now on the chopping block, especially the same-sex marriage case.
Correct. And So, as I said, the quickest way to address this would be to pass the bill that we passed in the House, which is the Women's Health Protection Act, which would do what Connecticut did, codify Roe, reestablish a right to privacy. There were actually more than 50 votes in the Senate, but they didn't have 60.
Right.
And unfortunately, Senator Manchin.
But you didn't
and
get
Senator-
many Republican votes.
No, but it was certainly a majority. And as you know, that the Constitution doesn't require 60 votes to pass a law.
Of
The
course.
filibuster rule is just pure
Right.
Senate rule that they can change with 51 votes, just like McConnell
Yeah.
did for Supreme Court nominations.
So your opponent would have voted against that, most
Oh
assuredly.
yeah, no, he's been
And
very critical of that
if
bill.
Kevin McCarthy gets to be Speaker of the House, that vote would never come to the floor.
Forget it. And and on the 15-week ban, which by the way, that was the Mississippi law that was the subject of the Dobbs
Right,
decision. So I mean, just kind of remind people of that. McCarthy was asked after the decision whether he would support that, and he said he could support it. So it's just, if people care
You
about,
can't believe a word he says.
and well, on this one, I think the warning flags are certainly up for people who care about privacy rights.
Right. So we think that your opponent is going to be against a lot of the economic measures. Parental family leave he's voted against. The minimum wage he's voted against. He's going to smoke him out on the Social Security issue. I hope on the prescription drug issue. Would he have voted for that? Probably not. I think you should smoke him out on that, and people should appreciate the fact that we have to keep a Democratic Congress, or all of these bills that have just been passed under Biden and the Democrats in the Senate and House can go away. Well, Biden will veto them if they try to overturn them, but we're going to have 2 years of
Gridlock.
of awful oppositional. What positive is going to get done, we don't know. Another area that you and I have been always talking about, and that is important to me and us, is the domestic violence field. You've worked on the Violence Against Women Act, re-upping it.
Right.
It was passed years ago, but it keeps getting re-upped and brought back in. And this time, hardly any Republicans voted for it. Whereas years ago, like you said, with Roe versus Wade, many Republicans voted. What's happening to the Republican Party?
Well, again, it's unfortunate because the Violence Against Women Act, which initially passed in the 1990s, as issues like the Obergefell decision evolved and same-sex marriage became, really kind of a across-the-board part of American life, the need to extend domestic violence protection in same-sex relationships became necessary. And again, so that some of the Republican opposition was aimed at what they considered an unacceptable sort of conduct or relationships, which is totally medieval.
And
at
in
this
Connecticut,
point.
our legislature has done a good job of having bills that will help protect victims and so forth, and they've made changes over the years, and your opponent has voted against two important laws, one involving the restraining order and firearms,
Right.
and another one, this last one, Jennifer's law, expanding the zone of protection for coercion and stalking and
Right.
so forth. How do you
So, I mean, Jennifer's law, which, as you point out, cracked down on cyber stalking, and it was Jennifer Duclose's murder case that triggered it, was a widely supported bipartisan bill. Only 8 no votes, and Mr. France was one
and your
of the 8
opponent
votes.
was one of the no
Correct.
votes on that law.
There was also another bill on domestic violence. And by the way, thank you for your great leadership over the years in this. I mean, from your days in practice, I mean, you really saw the need out here to provide safe places for victims to go to. And I mean, really, I want to make sure I recognize that, because it's not puffing, it's real. But there was another bill called the Time's Up.
And you're wearing a purple tie.
I
because
am.
and I should be wearing purple today.
Yes,
I've
right.
been remiss, because it is Domestic Violence Awareness
It is.
Month, and purple
October.
is the color, and I'm remiss in not doing it. But there you
Well,
go.
there was another bill called the Time's Up bill,
Yeah.
which again basically was brought forth on a bipartisan basis to address issues that the Me Too movement sort of really brought to the fore. And it did a number of things in terms of extending the statute of limitations for sexual assault cases, requiring, again, more workplace training to deal, with harassment.
And he voted against
he
that.
He did. And it was, again, another small minority.
Yeah,
that voted
and he gave
against it.
some reason at a recent debate you and I were at about somehow it wasn't following due process for, the law involving restraining orders, taking away firearms, just for a cooling off period until there could be a hearing on whether or not the restraining order should continue. But he, blamed that due process, whereas most courts have upheld those laws as saying they are within the due process.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I mean, the vote total shows that whatever arguments he was making obviously did not persuade the bipartisan majority that passed them.
Right. One more thing, the Electoral Count Act.
Yes.
Because we're still living through that January 6th. We have the committee, we have the Department of Justice, we have the district attorney in Georgia, all working on investigations and maybe criminal indictments arising out of them. But Congress is trying to change the Electoral Count Act to make it harder for the kind of shenanigans that Trump wanted to do with fake electors and having governors change the Electoral College votes. Talk about that. I know because the House has passed it. Now the Senate is changing it a bit. Maybe a vote will come after the midterm elections. How important is that?
It's critically important. Again, as somebody who was there on January 6th, I was in my office in the Rayburn building across the street from the chamber where the violence obviously happened. Again, COVID kind of kept the, density of people in the chamber down. What was some ways even more upsetting, and it was obviously shocking and surreal to see this building that is such a sacred place in our country's history getting attacked. And it was clearly aimed at undermining a constitutional process, which was the
They were trying to
certification.
stall or stop the vote.
The count.
Definitely,
Yes,
yeah.
stop the steal. That was the battle cry
Yeah.
that was there. But once the Capitol Police and the National Guard secured the building, much to the credit of the bipartisan leadership, was that we are not going to recess, because that would be almost like surrendering to what this mob was looking for. We reconvened and we went in early hours of the morning. I mean, again, you're walking in with broken glass. The staff were still in a state of shock that was happening there. And despite all of that, evidence of how dangerous the moment they were in, still 139 House members voted not to certify election results. And the notion that Congress somehow had the authority to overrule duly certified election results, many of which had been contested in court, and all of those claims were thrown out, is I think, as a matter of law, ludicrous. Having said that, to really just have some extra security so that this won't happen again, the Electoral Count Act is put into place to totally clarify that this is not what Congress's role is. It's to certify the results that come in literally from all 50 states, and the Vice President has no authority to overrule what, again, a duly elected election officer.
Ministerial thing. He's
Totally.
got to
So
count
that's the bill at its simplest point, and I do think there's bipartisan support in the Senate to get that
What's
through.
so interesting, Joe, is I read in the House, 9 Republicans voted for it, and every single one of them either lost their primary,
Right.
like Liz Cheney and Kinzinger,
Right.
or the other 7 aren't even running again.
You're talking about voted for the reform, correct?
For the Electoral
Yes,
Count Act.
correct. That's correct.
Isn't that
Yes,
amazing?
that is.
Not one of the Republicans who's standing for re-election hopes to get re-elected. I think that's kind of amazing.
So we'll see whether we can get the House version, which is a little more extensive in terms of also trying to go further upstream in terms of the certification process in states, which is very much at risk with some of the people who are running for office, election offices around the country. But I think, if I had to bet, if we can get a bill through, it's probably going to be very focused, again, in terms of just what is the authority of Congress and the Vice President, at that
It also
at that
doesn't it
moment.
also talk about how state legislatures are not going to have the authority to change, or
The House bill does.
secretaries. This is one that bothers me. that there are some states where the Secretary of State has some power over the electors who go to the Electoral College, and that we're worried about some of those, like Arizona and a couple of other of those states who want to have that ability to overturn in the future, have a Secretary of State tinker with the Electoral College. I don't know if the law will address that.
Yeah, the House bill really did, as I said, tried to go upstream to deal with some of these other concerns. Honestly, I don't think that that's probably going to make it through. Yeah, but as I said, I think it's important still to just make sure that we don't have a just totally outlandish argument made that we have the authority to overrule certified results.
But Congress, because of the filibuster also. So at the House of Representatives, you've passed so many bills that are just sitting on the desk of Mitch McConnell's desk in the Senate, and the filibuster will not allow them to go through. And one of them is we tried to change the Voting Rights Act. John Lewis, before he died, was very clear he wanted that done. People are trying to do that. The House passed something. What's going to happen with that?
It does not look like any of those voting bills are going to get to.
And the Supreme Court is getting ready to even overturn more and more the Voting Rights Act, which they overturned one portion of it, and they may do some more. That's what the thinking is after the last hearing we had on that.
No, there are a lot of challenges to our democracy right now, which are screaming out for congressional action. The John Lewis Act certainly is one. And anti-gerrymandering, which was in the H.R. 1 bill. Again, we can't sort of just take over how district redrawing is, but again, some states have really, I think, made some good progress in terms of depoliticizing the gerrymandering process. Connecticut, by the way, in our Constitution has actually a pretty good, I think, structure so that one party can't dominate just by a simple majority.
On the other hand, our election laws are built into the Constitution, so we need an amendment to have early voting. We're going to have it on the ballot, and I hope everybody's going to vote for that. We're one of the only, many states have very regressive voting laws, but many of them still, even those states, have early voting. The ones who are trying to get people not to vote. So hopefully that will pass this time in Connecticut.
No, I think every voter should be thrilled at the prospect that if you vote early, no one's going to call you to remind you to vote. No one's going to bother you. And it really would, I think, simplify.
Are you predicting this year we'll have a real surge in voting, that because of perhaps Roe versus Wade, because Trump is still in the air with the January 6th, with the fear for our democracy? Do you think, like in 2018, when the Democrats really had a big surge, do you think that we could defy the polls and have a really big surge?
I mean, it's very fluid out there. That's my feeling when I'm out there right now. And traditionally, as you know, midterms have always been a referendum on the sitting president. And things have changed, obviously, with the Supreme Court decision. Again, Trump's, just inability to control himself, to inject himself into the politics there, which I do think has made this less of a referendum on President Biden and more of a choice election. And so that's
a good thing.
And that's obviously why I think things have really gotten tight. But it's having been through enough of these, it's incumbent on certainly my supporters and the people who are helping me to just make sure that people do not don't overread headlines right now. You just got to assume that that every vote
the other thing
counts.
is that the press is, as we talked before, how they interview people. They're so intent on the horse race. Sometimes they leave out. They've got now the conventional wisdom just takes them on this journey of horse race, not really getting to the depth of things. But I want to end with what's happening in this area. Go back to the infrastructure bill, which some Republicans in the Senate did vote for, but not a lot in the Congress, right? You didn't get a lot of Republican support in the Congress.
No, I mean, actually, Kevin McCarthy whipped a no vote in his caucus.
Yeah, I mean,
and it was because President Trump was upset.
But don't you think if your opponent had ever made it to Congress, he would be touting the infrastructure bill?
Any rational person should. And again, if you just look at our region, already now there's cranes over at the Gold Star Bridge, which is long overdue for repairs. We've got now a contract for the old Saybrook Bridge, the rail bridge across the Connecticut River. That's going to be probably one of the biggest Amtrak projects in the country. Repair the swing bridge up in East Haddam, which is 120 years old. Very exciting development up in Enfield with a new train station in Thompsonville, so that trains going north and south from New Haven to Springfield will now stop in Enfield. And a lot of smaller projects, Route 66 in Willimantic. I was just up there visiting, again, the work that's happening there. We've already had dredging in Westbrook because of the infrastructure bill. We've had airport repairs in Wyndham and Danielson.
And of course, it creates jobs, obviously.
It creates jobs,
too, yeah.
and I mean, it's so overdue in terms of just
Right.
Every one of these. We're also looking at broadband. Now,
Right.
which it should be part of infrastructure, because you can't develop an area if businesses don't have adequate broadband.
So we saw Republican senators, Congress people taking credit for
Yes.
something they didn't vote for, and Biden said, "Wow, I didn't." They're always
Some
calling
socialists.
the Democrats socialists. I didn't realize so many socialists were in the Republican Party.
Well, we also call it vote no and take the dough.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the hypocrisy is, I think it's breathtaking, but whatever. So let's end with telling us why we have to keep the Congress and the Senate Democratic, how important it is for our democracy and for the kinds of programs that you want to see.
Right. Well, so again, Kevin McCarthy in some ways did us a favor by the commitment to America, because it really shows that the hard-fought gains in terms of green energy, bringing down the costs of prescription drugs, is on the ballot, and because this group is fully intent in terms of reversing what we just passed literally about a month ago. And in terms of trying to improve on those measures, and we talked about this before, those prescription drugs benefits should be extended to working age citizens of Connecticut. And we had a majority in the Senate, but not 60 to get that done. I mean, we know that we're overpaying in this country. I mean, it's in some analysis as much as 10 times higher than other developed countries. And healthcare costs is still a huge burden on people, and certainly a burden on the economy. In terms of, education, we've talked a little bit about job training. We have passed in the House an upgrade or an update to the National Apprenticeship Act, which is actually called the Fitzgerald Act, named after Congressman William Fitzgerald of Norwich, Connecticut.
Oh,
it was passed in 1937 and signed by Franklin Roosevelt.
Wow.
But we need to expand the scope of that to other sectors of the economy, healthcare, IT, and we had Secretary Marty Walsh up here, really touting that. So, these are the kind of things which I think right now our economy and our country really needs desperately, which is smart education policy that addresses the local economies and job markets, and and really just avoid what I think would be 2 years of pure gridlock.
Well, it seems like you and your colleagues, your Democrats in Congress, they strive to have programs that work for people in their communities, in the states, in the country. And the Republicans seem to be it's almost a nihilism about it, isn't there? An opposition. And the only thing they can ever really come up with is lower taxes.
Right. So, and to that point, I mean, the Inflation Reduction Act, one of the reasons why it reduces the deficit is because we put a 15% minimum tax on corporations whose profits are reported over $1 billion, and also put on an excise tax for stock buybacks. Two provisions which obviously the big corporations hate. But there's no question that there's roughly about 200 of the major corporations in this country that pay almost no tax at all.
Well, that's the other big issue that it's not a sleeper issue, it's a serious issue in America, the disparity between rich and poor, and how it's growing, how the middle class is getting squeezed. And I don't know the exact statistics, but like 0.0001% of the population owns 90% of the wealth.
And the stock buyback, is just a device for these companies to, particularly the oil companies with all the profits that they've taken in. You can give your stockholders the benefit of a buyback, which is taxed at a much lower rate than dividends. I mean, it has nothing to do with making the company better or increase energy supplies or anything like that. It's just a pure tax dodge.
Right. So, having said all of that, you're still in it. You're
I am.
on the go constantly. Why do you want to do this? What do you get out of it? What's going on?
Well, again, I love this district. It's a really interesting, mixture of different populations and activity that goes on here. Yukon, the shoreline, obviously the Navy installation and shipyard, the huge presence of agriculture, which also the climate change provisions includes huge help for small farms in particular. So that excites me in terms of really feeling like we're doing things that make a difference, a positive in people's lives. And I learned my lesson from early days in politics. That's the right reason, and I still am motivated to accomplish that.
Do the right thing for the right reasons.
That's right.
Yeah, and make a difference. Great. Well, thank you, Joe.
Okay.
Good luck on the campaign
All right,
trail.
Sheila.
We'll see you soon.
All right, thanks again. Yep.
We'll see everybody next time on Talk Back. We'll have more politicians over the next few weeks getting ready for the November 8th midterm elections. Please vote. See you next time. Bye.